get your subject farther from the background, and then also shoot through something, that's like the trifecta, perfect everything. I don't know, that's just like, I think it looks great. So a big problem I see with iPhone filmmaking, or really just filmmaking in general, is that it seems like people don't know how to create depth in their images. And I think this comes from the fact that we have really shallow depth of field lenses now that can go down to 2.8 or even 1.2, and it makes the need for actual depth in composing your shot well seem less important. So when someone picks up an iPhone and there's little to no depth of field, they don't know how to create a good image because they're used to using the depth of field, or the shallow depth of field, as a crutch. And I'm not saying all filmmakers are clueless. I think it goes to the idea that creativity will thrive within boundaries. Not having the ability to do just anything will force you to be creative. And I think it's important to talk about the difference between depth and depth of field. So depth of field is basically just the blurriness of the background, and that's mainly determined by your lens focal length and your aperture. But real depth isn't just the blurriness of the background. It actually comes from just a well-composed shot, having different elements like foreground, your subject actually being separated from your background. And I'm not saying it's bad to have a blurry background all the time. Sometimes it makes sense story-wise, but the problem is that people use it all the time, and even when it doesn't make sense story-wise. When someone has their aperture at f1.2 and it's not doing anything for the story, I kind of see that as them not knowing how to create a good image, and they're just trying to fake it by using shallow depth of field. You have to compose a good shot. Even when I'm shooting live events run and gun style, I try to anticipate things before they happen so that I can be in the right place doing the right movement at the exact right moment. That's a tongue twister. Anyway, this is not about composing, this is about creating depth. So, tip number 1, physical separation from the background. If your subject is standing right up against a wall while you're shooting, it's going to be really hard to create any depth because there's no depth there. They're just standing there right on the background. Have them step several feet off the wall, like ideally 8 to 10 feet really. I'm only like 3 feet from my background right now, but it's dark, so it doesn't really matter. But if you can create some physical separation from your subject in the background, that really helps. Number 2 is your angle and your composition. So this can be a couple different things, but just make sure that you're incorporating things like leading lines, because if you're shooting straight on at something, straight on your subject standing up against a wall, that's a zero depth image. However, if you didn't want to move them off the wall, you can actually just rotate your camera around a little bit so that you're shooting at them more from the side, and the wall would create leading lines toward your subject while they're, talking or whatever they're doing. And that's a lot better way to shoot something, and it adds a lot more depth to your image at the same time. Also, if you're holding the camera up too high, then you're reducing the amount of depth in the image as well. So if you can lower it, you're giving space between the subject and the ceiling or the sky, and that's another form of physical separation from the background. Number 3, lighting. You gotta create some contrast in your image. Right now, the light is on me and the background is very dark. It makes me stand out from the background. It's creating a contrast in the image. You can also use color here, and that can either be the colors of your lights, the color grade, or a combination of both like I'm doing right now. That's why the orange and teal color grade look is very popular, because it allows the skin tones or the subject to kind of have a more orange natural feel, and then you can put some blue into the shadows and create a nice contrast. There's tons of different ways that you can do this, tons of different color styles. Just play around with the lighting to create contrast, play around with the color to make your subject pop. Next, get closer. Specifically for iPhone, with this smaller sensor, you're not getting as much depth of field like I mentioned earlier, but one of the ways you get around this is by just simply getting closer to your subject. Having the camera physically closer to the subject and the subject physically farther from the background is how you get natural shallow depth of field from an iPhone. The next tip, and this is one of my favorites, I'm even using it right now, foreground. Foreground is just so fun to play with. Just find anything around that you can shoot through. It adds depth to your image because you are now layering things. It's not just, your subject is kind of around their background, but if you can get your subject farther from the background and then also shoot through something, that's like the trifecta, perfect everything. I don't know, that's just like, I think it looks great, and I do this with photography as well, just shooting through things all the time. It really does add another dimension to your shots. And lastly, I like to use moment lenses when I need a blurry background. The moment telephoto lens gives a really nice kind of crispy look to the subject while adding some blur. It's also much higher quality than the telephoto lens straight off your iPhone. But if you really need that a little bit more blur, I know there's some other depth of field adapters and stuff if you really need that, but those things just look so bulky that I don't think I would ever use them. The moment telephoto lens is nice and small, compact. I can, carry it with me in my bag everywhere. And then whenever I need to either, just have a little bit tighter of a shot, and I don't really like using the telephoto lens because the quality is pretty bad, at least on my iPhone, but the moment telephoto lens, it just looks beautiful. And then also the macro lens will do that. Some of the shots I've gotten with the macro lens, they're some of my favorite shots because of how different they look, and you look at them and there's just absolutely no way it could have been shot with an iPhone, yet it was. And that's what I love doing. I like trying to take the things that people think you can't do with an iPhone and doing them. I don't know why, I found that to be fun, and I've learned so much about it, and that's why I'm making this channel. So if this video was helpful, please hit the like button, and then I will see you in this video right over here. And always, make it happen.